Welcome everyone to the 2020 Blackett lecture. Let me start by failing to move the, excuse me, let me restart the screen sharing. Try again. Hurrah, second time lucky. Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone to the Blackett Lecture 2021. I'm pleased to introduce our President, Professor Edmund Burke, who's going to take you through our awards.
Thank you, Gavin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the Blackett Lecture 2021 and awards ceremony. This is the second year that we've been forced to hold the event online, but hopefully next year we'll be able to get back to something more like normal. We are exploring the possibility of a hybrid event where those who want to get together with us in London to attend the event can do, and those who want to come in virtually can too. As ever, the event is in two parts. We'll be announcing the winners of many of the Society's awards in the first part, before moving on to the main focus of tonight's event, Anthony Finkelstein's lecture. So first, let's celebrate some examples of what makes OR great. We'll start with the Society's most prestigious award, the Beale Medal. This is awarded in recognition of the sustained contribution over many years to the theory, practice, or philosophy of OR in the UK. And the winner for 2021 is Professor Chris Potts from the University of Southampton. Chris has made truly outstanding contributions to the theory of operational research, particularly in the area of scheduling of single and multi-machine production systems in manufacturing. His later work has focused on developing new theory and methods for problems arising in logistics and transportation, including airport runway scheduling, railway timetabling, vehicle routing, and workforce scheduling. He's also contributed to significant research on problems in the healthcare and sport sectors. Through his supervision of more than 70 projects with industry, Chris has also made remarkable contributions to the practice of OR. His involvement in large-scale projects such as those to increase airport throughput or the capacity of the rail network further highlights his contributions in enhancing the impact of OR. Chris has provided excellent support to the development of OR in the UK, including being one of the founder members behind securing the multi-million-pound LANX initiative, and also being one of the main contributors to the National Tort Course Centre in operational research. His other roles have involved being a research assessment exercise panel member in 2008 and serving as Vice President of Euro from 2003 to 2006. To conclude, Chris has made a sustained and significant contribution to the area, particularly in scheduling. He's also developed and led large projects and worked with external organisations to translate his research into practice. As head of the OR group at Southampton for many years, and through his work supporting NatCore, he's also been a mainstay of the OR academic community in the UK. Congratulations, Chris. It is very, very well deserved. Now I will move on to the companion of OR. This is given for sustained support and encouragement for the development of operational research, or for those in influential positions or in broad sympathy with the subject area. Such contributions might be through public or private activities. And the winner for 2021 is Professor Christine Pagel from the University College London. Christina, through her work during the COVID-19 pandemic, has achieved a public profile and influence that is quite remarkable. Her appearances on various news outlets, such as Channel 4 News and Sky, have put the words operational research before millions of people. Her membership of Independent SAGE is highly significant to public discourse, with her media contributions being in the best tradition of OR, based on evidence, clearly rationalised and plainly expressed, all in order to improve the quality of the public debate. Christina's public profile is certainly a reflection of her distinguished career in OR research in a healthcare setting. Her current research uses approaches for mathematical modelling, OR and data sciences to help people within the health service make better decisions. She particularly focuses on mortality and morbidity outcomes following cardiac surgery in children and adults in the UK. In 2019, she was awarded the Lynn Thomas Impact Medal from our society, along with her colleagues Sonia Crow and Martin Utley. The award was made for their work related to congenital heart disease. It was shortly after this that she began her role in the public eye with Independent SAGE. She's made it very clear that she worked out rapidly on joining, that there was no point in Independent SAGE mimicking the modelling, and that the gap in the scientific approach was in transparency, communication, and OR modelling. She therefore took on the role of translating and communicating the research and modelling findings using her OR experience. In conclusion, the impactful and high public profile that Christina has achieved at a time of crisis, both for herself and for OR, make her an extremely worthy companion of OR. Congratulations, Christina. Very, very well deserved. I'll now move to the Good Eve Medal. This is awarded in recognition for the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of OR published in the Journal of the OR Society within the relevant year, which in this case is 2020. And the winners are Greg Garrett, Jeffrey Weir, Alan Johnson, and David Jacks. The winning team is from the Air Force Institute of Technology based in the US. The title of the winning paper is Advancing Stock Policy on Repairable, Intermittently Demanded Service Parts. Many firms generate revenue by operating systems or fleets such as rental cars, aircraft, equipment, etc. The contribution of service parts to the availability of the system or fleet is well documented. The majority of service parts are intermittently demanded. Research on intermittent demand is primarily focused on forecast accuracy and generally does not distinguish between the stock policies of consumable versus repairable parts, although repair is sometimes more cost-effective. But managing repairable parts is considerably more complex than managing consumable parts. In this paper, the authors employ a new approach to advance the supply chain manager's ability to determine cost-effective stock. They use a multi-objective approach covering waiting times and various components of cost. They solve this using different approaches, including seeking a Pareto surface. They test the new approach via a case study and show the method to be beneficial for a given firm. The approach is generalizable to many sectors, including transport, health, and local services. This paper offers a significant development of stock modeling. Congratulations. I'll now move on to the Stafford Beer Medal. This is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of information systems published in the European Journal of Information Systems within the relevant year, which is again 2020. And the winners are Abayomi Bea, Hannu Salmela, and Tommy Tapanainen. The authors are based in Denmark, Finland, and Korea. The title of the paper is Digital Transformation and the New Logics of Business Process Management. Digital transformation requires a rethinking of many business process as management principles, known as BPM. This paper explains 3 important logics of BPM that need to be re-examined. They are process modeling, infrastructural alignment, and procedural actor logics. The judges thought this a well-executed study that provides valuable counterintuitive findings to challenge existing logics of BPM. Furthermore, this article is relevant for many organizations because the focus is broad and the insights are actionable. Well done. I'll now move on to the Tocker Medal. So this is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice of the Journal of Simulation. The Tocker Medal is awarded biennially, and this particular award relates to work published in the 2019 to 2020 editions. And the winners are Eric Applegate, Guy Feldman, Susan Hunter, and Maghu Pasupathy. They're based in the School of Industrial Engineering and Department of Statistics at Purdue University in the US. The title of the paper is Multi-Objective Ranking and Selection, Optimal Sampling Laws and Tractable Approximations via Score. The paper considers the multi-objective ranking and selection problem for a finite set of systems evaluated on 3 or more stochastic objectives. With this setting comes the issue of how to allocate a given simulation budget across competing systems in order to efficiently identify the Pareto set whilst minimizing the likelihood of misclassifying any of the systems. Towards this issue, the paper presents 2 simulation budget allocations called MoScore and IMoScore, which maximize the misclassification probability decay rate. Derivation of the allocations and a sequential algorithm to aid practical implementation are presented alongside an extensive numerical evaluation that illustrates how the allocations can be used to reliably solve Moore's problems in 3 or more objectives. Congratulations, very well done. Let's now move on to the Griffiths Medal, which is awarded in recognition of the most outstanding contribution to the philosophy, theory, or practice in the Health Systems Journal. The Griffiths Medal is also awarded biennially, and this particular award relates to work published in the 2019 to 2020 editions. The winners are Terry Young, Seda Surampans, Jim Wilkerson, Lance Milberg, Todd Roberts, and David Morgage. A team representing institutions across the UK and the US. The title is The Costs and Value of Modelling-Based Design in Healthcare Delivery, 5 case studies from the US. Assessment of the impact of modelling on decisions in healthcare management has not been sufficiently studied, and where it has been, it's tended to indicate a disappointing picture. This clear and concise paper helps redress both those problems by analysing the costs of modelling and the savings resulting from a number of healthcare management decisions that were based on simulation results. It demonstrates that modelling can make powerful contributions to shaping the design of healthcare systems, improving their cost effectiveness to an extent that can hugely outweigh the cost of the modelling. The paper should encourage analysts to more regularly assess the impact and cost effectiveness of their work, and managers to make more use of modelling to improve healthcare systems. Congratulations to the team. We now move to the President's Medal. This is awarded for the best account of successful OR practice entered for competition and presented at the Society's annual conference. The winners of the President's Medal are Antuela Teiko, Stuart Robinson, Anastasia Gogi, and Zoe Radner. The project title is the Simtech GR8 project, helping the Lightbulb service deliver improved housing support services to the frail and vulnerable in Leicestershire and Rutland. So this has been awarded for a project that combined technical expertise and novel approaches with high levels of impact for vulnerable communities. In a highly competitive field, this project impressed the judges in several ways. The enhancements to housing support services delivered as a result of this project significantly improved the lives of the frail and vulnerable beneficiaries, at the same time as providing significant cost savings for the service provider, the local council. The cost savings were highly impressive, halving the service costs per case. The project involved combining different approaches based on soft systems and lean service improvement methodologies. It ensured that core OR techniques were at the heart of evaluation processes, but brought together service providers and users in the form of patients. The longevity of the project was also key, from supporting the initial business case through service optimization to savings over several years. It's for this combination of technical challenge, degree of innovation, and scale of benefit that the judges unanimously selected this project as a worthy winner in a very, very competitive field. Well done, team, a really great project. We now move to the doctoral award. This is given for the most distinguished body of research, leading to the award of a doctorate in the field of OR at a UK university. The award is given in the calendar year in which the PhD or DPhil is defended or approved. The winner is Dr. Jake Clarkson from the University of Lancaster. Title is Optimal Search in Discrete Locations, Extensions and New Findings. A classical search problem involves finding an object hidden in one of several discrete locations according to some known probability distribution. The objective is for the searcher to discover the object in minimum expected time. In this thesis, Jake Clarkson presents two extensions of this classical search problem. The first is applicable for situations where two possible types of search are available. The search can either be slow, which results in a higher probability of finding the object, or faster, but with a lower probability. The thesis develops sufficient conditions for the optimal search of a location to use the slow speed or the fast speed. This allows the optimal search problem to be solved in many cases and also leads to effective heuristic policies with performance guarantees in other cases. The second extension deals with a situation where the object corresponds to a hider who aims to remain undetected for maximum expected time. In this variant, the searcher has no knowledge of the probability distribution with which the hider is located. And instead, the probability distribution is chosen by an adversary who tries to make the search as hard as possible. The resulting problem is a semi-infinite search game. The thesis introduced a variety of innovative ideas to produce a successful analysis. The lead supervisor comments that the thesis exhibits a depth of insight and power of analysis, which, in my experience, extensive experience of supervising and examining PhDs, is without parallel. Two joint external examiners states that this dissertation is the best we have examined. In terms of the first extension, with alternative speeds, the examiners predict that it will become highly cited and lead to a new branch of the search theory literature and application. In terms of the second extension, involving a search game, they state that previous work has produced partial analyses and discussion of special cases, but Jake's work has in all essentials solved the problem. Congratulations, Jake. Very, very well deserved. We now have the Lynn Thomas Impact Medal. This is given for academic OR research which best demonstrates both novelty and real-world impact backed up by evidence. Impact can be of many forms, including societal, economic, cultural, entertainment, health-related, political, quality of life, or others. The winners are Professor Paul Harper, Dr. Isabella Spurnays, Dr. Daniel Gartner, Dr. Tracy England, Dr. Doris Behrens, Dr. Vincent Knight, Dr. Geraint Palmer, Dr. Mark Tewson, and Professor Sue Bale. This is a joint team from Cardiff University and the Newrin Bevin University Health Board looking at transforming healthcare services with OR. Since 2014, a group of OR academics at Cardiff, led by Paul, has worked closely with the Newrin Bevin University Health Board under a Researchers in Residence scheme. Staff, PhD students, and postdocs are embedded within the hospital's continuous improvement department, giving them direct access to financial planners, senior managers, and clinicians. Moreover, the team are seen by NHS staff as colleagues rather than outsiders, and this relationship has provided opportunities to pioneer novel modelling techniques within the NHS. Many OR techniques have been used to approach problems such as forecasting, demand and capacity planning, simulation, optimization, and scheduling. The team have also trained NHS staff in modelling skills. To date, the modelling team has a portfolio of over 150 completed projects, and their work has directly led to evidenced cost savings of at least £12.1 million. The examples listed in their application include informing the design of a new hospital, leading to ongoing savings of £900,000 a year over the original design, and supporting mental health outreach teams, leading to a reduction of 79% in avoidable hospital admissions. They were also involved in designing and launching the NHS 111 service and in advising the Welsh Government about the response to COVID-19, in particular, initial demand and capacity planning and logistics. It's been said for many years that the NHS lags behind other organisations in its use of OR. The Cardiff team have demonstrated how to change this. It's extremely impressive. Congratulations, team. Well done. I'm sure that Lynn would agree that you are very worthy winners of the award that bears his name. So, pre-pandemic, I would have been handing out the awards at the event in London. In this virtual environment, what we will do is post out the winners' medals and certificates to them in the next few days. Congratulations to all our winners. I'm sure everybody in this audience, this virtual audience, will agree that they have presented OR as an exciting and innovative field, and all of our winners are a credit to the discipline. Thank you all very, very much, and congratulations to all of you. Now, on to the main element of today's event, the Blackett Memorial Lecture. But before I introduce the speaker, I'll run through a few quick housekeeping points. We've got the chat function. Can you use that to send messages, please, rather than raising your hand? There are too many people to spot hands raised. So let's use the chat function, please. We will have time for questions and answers. Gavin will lead that at the end of the talk. If you've got any questions for Anthony, then please do send them in via the chat function. And it is also possible to like existing questions, and that will prioritize the order of the questions that Gavin asks. So that's the housekeeping. After the lecture, we do have another session to allow you all to network and to discuss the issues that have been raised in the lecture. I understand that details of the session have already been sent to you all, but we will remind you about this after the question and answer session. So let's move on to our speaker. It gives me great pleasure. I'm truly delighted to welcome Anthony to the OR Society, to welcome Anthony to the Blackett Lecture. He follows an illustrious list of Blackett lecturers. So Anthony is the president of City University of London and a professor of software systems engineering. I've been aware of Anthony's work for many, many years because it is so impactful and his research is so distinguished. He's a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and also a member of Academia Europa, a fellow of City and Guilds of London Institute, and a distinguished fellow of the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. He has an honorary DSc from City University of London. He was appointed a commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to computer science and engineering. Until taking up the role of leading City University, he was Chief Scientific Advisor for National Security to the government, a senior strategic and operational role that involves leadership of science, research and innovation across the UK's national security community. Whilst undertaking this role, he retained a position at UCL and as a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute, the UK National Institute for AI and Data Science, of which he was a founding trustee. Before this, he was Dean of UCL Faculty of Engineering Sciences, and before that, head of UCL's Department of Computer Science. He held a chair in software systems engineering at UCL, having started his career at Imperial College in the Department of Computing. He's established 3 successful spin-out companies, including 2 exits. Anthony is going to speak for around 45 minutes, and then we'll move on to questions and answers. Anthony, thank you very much for agreeing to give this lecture. We're delighted to welcome you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Edmund. I mean, it's always slightly weird to follow a lecture after a fulsome introduction such as that, and it's doubly weird to start a lecture following a list of distinguished achievements and awards of the type we've just seen. And I'm only sorry, as I think everybody is, that we couldn't be at the gala event that all that achievement clearly merits, and the opportunity to put on dinner jackets and sparkly dresses and whatever is clearly going to be missed by all. And this digital form is what we have left. So congratulations to all the awardees. So what I'm going to do this evening is to outline some of the challenges for national security in the context of rapid change in science, technology, and the global order. A change which has disrupted societies and along the way, the operational model upon which security and intelligence rests. And I'm going to think a little bit about how we should respond from a defense and security and from a national standpoint in the short, medium, and long term. I'm going to obviously highlight systems thinking and modeling, which, though I sort of, I come out advertised as a computer scientist and software engineer, those have run through my career, essentially. They've been one of the intellectual cores of my career. And I'm going to borrow very significantly on the intellectual legacy of Patrick Blackett, in whose honor this lecture is appropriately named. So I won't reprise my my personal CV at this point, which has already been outlined by Edmund, but it's probably worthwhile saying a little bit about chief scientific advisors in government. Actually, of course, now most of us are familiar what CSAs do, and because we've seen Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance on the television doing wonders for the standing of scientists in society. It's a unique system which has its roots actually really quite deep in the wartime contributions that Patrick Blackett himself made. And indeed, I was the government's chief scientific advisor for national security. And that was a role that Patrick Vallance himself, that Patrick Blackett actually was responsible for foregrounding. So he was the first person to actually write that national security intelligence required its own chief scientific advisor. And it took British government mere 60 years before they got round, maybe and plus, before they got round to actually doing it, but do it they did. It's worthwhile too, this is November the 11th, the 11th day of the 11th month, and it's certainly worthwhile signalling the service that Patrick Blackett made to society, and indeed that so many operations researchers made during wartime and during the time when this country had most need of it. So what does our Chief Scientific Advisor for National Security do? Well, the Chief Scientific Advisor for National Security had a number of roles. The first is the leadership of science, research and innovation projects across the UK's national security community, which means the major departments of state responsible for handling national security problems, as well as the UK's security and intelligence agencies. The second is to support, through scientific input, strategic decision-making in national security. So to contribute to strategic decisions that the national security community is required to make, and particularly that involves foresight. So I spent a lot of my time getting people not necessarily that predisposed to it, to looking a little bit further down the road than they were accustomed to doing. The third part of the role is working with other chief scientific advisors across government on cross-cutting and interdisciplinary problems. So I worked on a whole range of problems with other chief scientific advisors. They included working with Chris Whitty on the Salisbury poisoning, which was a sage. So many people don't know that sages happen for reasons other than COVID. So for the Salisbury sage, but we also worked on things like the relationship between mental health and lone actor violence, another problem, and a little bit on contact tracing and on what technologies could be used to support contact tracing. And there are a range of other cross-government things. I worked with DCMS on age verification on the internet and other similar problems. Obviously, lots of work with defence and other bits of security beyond national security policing, and so forth. Then the other bits of the role involved connection with the innovation ecosystem more broadly, and the business of how to draw innovation into national security and into government. And finally, I worked very strongly as a chief scientific advisor on the intersection between the missions of national security, so counterterrorism, counterintelligence, counter-nuclear, and so on and so forth. So that's basically the array of roles. What I'm going to be talking about in this lecture are three key themes that emerge from that. The first is I'm going to be talking a little bit about strategic advantage in science and technology and the new role of science and technology in geopolitics. The second thing I'm going to be talking about is the way in which science and technology has disrupted the operating models for national security in the UK and globally, and what that means. And of course, I'll be also making reference to the role of systems thinking and operations research in addressing some of that disruption. And the third is I'll be looking at the opportunities presented by advances in science and technology for operational advantage on the part of the UK's national security things. Now, before I go on, I think it's probably worthwhile just saying a few words about what national security is, just so that we're anchored. So national security are the actions that we take in order to preserve the UK's system of democracy and the rule of law. It's about keeping the citizens of this country and our allies safe from the actions of adversaries, be those hostile states or non-state actors, in general those who wish us and our allies ill. It's a system governed by the rule of law and framed by democratic oversight, and indeed that's a critical aspect of the way in which the UK conducts its national security. And indeed, for reasons that we may come to later, actually is itself a really interesting, the systems of oversight and regulation are themselves very interestingly subject to impact from science and technology in a range of different areas. So that's the three key themes of the talk, and what the target is. I think it's probably worthwhile starting with a little bit of context on what's happening globally. I don't think I need to spend too much time with this audience on exponential change in science and technology. We're seeing a rapid and continuing acceleration in the pace of technological development. Everybody's familiar with, or most people are familiar with Moore's law, you know, the famous thing that, you know, crudely, it's not exactly framed like this, you know, the speed of computing sort of doubles every 18 months. It's worthwhile. I always prefer a formulation to say, you know, when you first got your mobile phone, first mobile phone, and think about your mobile phone now. Well, think about getting all that improvement again in the next 18 months. That's what an exponential means. It needs less explanation at the moment, I think, than it used to. So this has, you know, a profound effect on the way in which all organizations, but particularly governmental organizations, approach the question of how they operate and science and technology. The next thing to say is that, you know, science and technology are increasingly globalized. We now have, and we can immediately see that where not only by the growth of what you might call near peer or peer competitors to the UK and the US in science and technology, specifically China, but the accessibility of science and technology more globally, and the accessibility of scientific and technological capabilities, globally, and I will make reference to that. Actually, the best way I think to think about this is, people are probably familiar with the phrase, asymmetric and symmetric conflicts. So a symmetric conflict in geopolitical terms has always been a conflict in which you face off to an adversary, and with that adversary, you have two things. You have resources that you can bring to bear in the conflict, and you have strategic and tactical options you can bring to bear in the conflict. And a symmetric conflict is basically match. You have roughly matching resourcing and roughly matching strategic opportunities. And then it's really a question in a symmetric conflict of who edges it. Mostly who edges it in terms of resources. Classically, the Cold War was thought of as symmetric conflict, conflict between peers, and in fact, as it turned out, the Western democracies succeeded in the Cold War by virtue of edging the resource calculation. Asymmetric conflicts are much more interesting in some ways, because what you have there is an asymmetry. One party enjoys the advantage in resources, but doesn't enjoy or doesn't possess the range of tactical and strategic possibilities that the other party represents, for good or for has accessible, for good or for ill. So imagine the situation of Islamic State facing off against Western powers. They do not possess the resourcing, but do possess, this is a contention, but possess the option to undertake actions which a democracy would not choose, could not and would not choose to exercise. So you get an asymmetry, and in these cases unclear, as in classic insurgencies, it's unclear who has the advantage, where the advantage lies, whether it lies with resourcing or strategic opportunities. The thing is that the situation was quite clear some time ago. It was quite clear that a technological advantage was possessed by large nation states, principally us and our allies. We possessed the technological capabilities. These were, largely specialized defense capabilities and advanced technology capabilities, which other parties just simply did not possess. But that's basically changed. So if you think, want advanced, secure, cryptographically protected communications, download the app. Want a sophisticated manufacturing capability, print it. Want a bio capability, order it on the internet. want access to a global science science base, here it is, Google Scholar will deliver it to you. So the situation's changed, and where certain states had those asymmetric resource advantages, those have been largely flattened. So this is another feature of the setting we find ourselves in, with asymmetries being edged away. The last observation is one I find quite useful, and about content is one I find quite useful. Some of you, I guess those of you in the OR Society who have a defense background, will be familiar with what's sometimes called the Boyd loop or the OODA loop. This is basically the OODA loop. OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It's an action loop. It's an action feedback loop. And it's used classically to define, to describe conflict situations. Your goal as a party to a conflicting situation is to get round the OODA loop faster than your adversary. In other words, can you observe, orient, decide, and act faster than your adversary? Sometimes described as getting your OODA loop inside the feedback loop of your adversary. So the problem is that with sophisticated digital communication, with access to sophisticated digital communications, a relatively unsophisticated adversary in some regards can operate much faster and more agilely than a large, ponderous government bureaucracy can. So this agility, this agility confers the adversary an advantage, and means that the large nation state, national security apparatus, needs to try and find a way of moving more rapidly. So enough of context. So my first contention is that science and technology is a domain of strategic competition between states. And if we didn't know that before the pandemic, we definitely know it now. What confers, look at the UK, what confers the largest benefit to the national security of the UK has been our scientific capability and our ability to produce a vaccine. That's a massive asset for the United Kingdom, and exemplifies the way as hitherto science and technology was sort of somehow seen a little bit as additional capabilities contributing to national prosperity. Now those capabilities, the capability to generate, for example, a medical capability, or perhaps we might envisage to mitigate climate change and everything like that. These lie right at the heart of what we understand the state's power to be. We are subject to highly optimized global supply chains in which success in gaining benefit from those supply chains depends upon intelligence and foresight. We're faced with China, who's leveraging a strong economic position and asserting global leadership to bolster international influence. It's also seeking to increase its dominance in key emerging technologies through targeted foreign direct investment, intensified competition for talent, and the strategic use of state funding. It's maximizing the fusion of its defense and civil innovation capabilities in a way we have not done in the UK. And it's probably worthwhile noting that the US is cohering a national technology strategy with success in great power competition as its primary goal. So a changing national security context, S&T as a domain of strategic competition, fragile supply chains, China and the US in a great power competition around those. So what are our choices for the UK? So the first is to make overall to make a strategic choice to retain the UK's position as a tier 1 player in science and technology. The phrase, you can like it or not, it doesn't matter because it is the phrase that's been used, which is a science and technology superpower. So the UK as a science and technology superpower in a more competitive global context. So what does that mean for national security? Well, it means that we're going to have to place much more focus nationally on establishing foresight in critical emerging technology areas and really understanding the implications for UK prosperity, security, and society. I think that we are going to have to get much better at making difficult choices on where the UK can realistically establish and hold a lead in those critical technology areas. We haven't done that before. We've largely operated a bottom-up system with some advantages. It has to be said, but I'm not sure that is sustainable in the new context. And it's clear that we are going to have to be much clearer about how we extract hard and soft power from the UK's S&T strength. So we've clearly enjoyed a strong position in science and technology for a considerable period, but we've not explicitly factored that in to calculations about how the UK is to establish and retain its position. I think we have to get much harder headed about that. The next thing to say is that, you know, national security has often focused itself on terrorism, on conflict in areas such as the Middle East and other areas like that, and on great power and on sort of the edges of great power conflict. It's probably worthwhile saying that we may well need to think a little bit more seriously about the risks to UK security and resilience from more global challenges such as climate change, demographics, migration, and health security. So the conventional sort of more defense lens for conventional lens for national security may well have to change. The centrality of S&T to geopolitics means that actually we can no longer leave the shaping of international rules, norms, and standards alone. So those, particularly the area of technological and other standards, are areas we are going to have to pay increasing attention to. We cannot allow, for example, the future shape of the internet to be determined by Chinese standards making and to be honest, large US tech platforms. We're going to have to take a much more forward-leaning role in that regard. We're going to have to make quite sure that we are explicit about investing in science and technology areas where that underpins our critical alliances and partnerships. So the UK's partnerships with other democracies, and I think of this beyond the obvious allies, have got to be a critical part of our calculations about where we will work and what we will work on. And again, we need to be much better at understanding our competitors' strategic research and development and how they are using it for influence. The classic example of this might be, for example, the work that China has been doing in the area of smart cities and how that has been used as a tool for global influence in areas like Africa and along the Belt and Road, that is in a regional hegemon as a potential regional hegemon. Traditionally, much of the work of national security and defense actually has been done behind high barbed wire fences, surrounded by a security wrapper. That has meant that much of this has not been visible. That strategy is just simply no longer feasible, except maybe in limited areas where, except maybe in highly constrained areas. There's no way, the UK, quite frankly, even the US establishment can compete with the pace and scale of investment in open innovation. So there needs to be a completely different approach, and that's got to be underpinned by targeted incentives. It's got to be underpinned by a new national security capacity to partner and co-develop with the UK private sector. It needs to be underpinned by a really smart understanding of what in national security we call sovereign capabilities, those things which we do wish to retain absolutely in the UK and probably wish to protect more strongly, and how we also better protect UK innovation assets from espionage, predatory foreign direct investment, and market failure, actually, which is a bit of a problem in some of the areas of sovereign technology. It's clear that there's a skills problem. There's a skills problem actually across government, and there's work to be done on supplying the science, partnership, and critically skills to enable the sort of transformations that I have described. So, you know, in many of the areas that people on this call are most interested in, you know, in data science and artificial intelligence, machine learning, in optimization, you know, the whole, I'll come to some other areas a little later on. All of those things are going to be critical areas where the supply of skills is going to be need to adapt, and we need government decision makers with science and technology and data literacy skills. I think there has been some evidence, you know, that in the largest part our governmental decision makers have been, you know, poorly equipped to deal with, for example, the advances in modeling. And I think the pandemic has shown this quite clearly. This is not a criticism of the decisions that are made, but is a criticism of the readiness and skills within government to address those. To address those issues. I suppose I should make special reference to cyber, because this is clearly a national security domain in which change is happening very rapidly. We need to retain the UK's cyber power, and we need to mitigate many of the risks that are associated with the dependence upon global technology, and ensure that the UK has access to trustworthy and diverse supply chains for technology. And we need to be in the lead in security technologies in this area. Basically building a technology base that reflects our values, and something we are going to need to defend through the multi-stakeholder international standards system. So that's a basic canter through the broad strategic advantage in science and technology theme. I want to now come to the two other themes that perhaps lie closer to the scientific heart of people represented in the OR Society. The first is the disruption of the national security operating model. Some people use the cheap tag, which is, you know, secrecy is dead. It's becoming increasingly difficult to use secrecy as a tool for national security. It's probably better, rather than saying to say that the cost of secrecy on the part of government is rising very rapidly, and the days in which, you know, you could print a the days in which what you could do is, print a card which said universal exports and go out to where, whatever country you wanted and talk to people is long gone. And with that rising cost of secrecy, what you've got is the reducing cost of open source research. You've seen the amazing things that have been done by dint of data journalism and open source researchers become very evident to people. So that's becoming a really important disruptor to the operating model. So how open source and closed source interact, well, I'll come to how one might respond. The thing that I spoke about earlier, which is that about asymmetry and symmetric, of course, means that the nature of the adversaries is changing. You could historically assume that cutting edge capabilities, for example, cutting edge data science capabilities, were only in the hands of your most feared, largest, most capable adversaries. Now, potentially any state can possess those capabilities. There's no reason why Indonesia or Egypt or Zambia or choose any country. I know I chose those genuinely at random. Might not possess a cutting edge capability in those regards. And so the nature of the threat to the national security operating model changes changing very radically. So what's the response? So wholly new ways of engaging with national security customers, wholly new ways of integrating open source information with that very, very precious, very, very expensive secret information which government needs to possess. Actually being able to being able to fuse the capabilities of government so that we're able to act in the so-called grey zone in the same way that adversaries are able to do. Understanding the science and maths of secrecy will be really important. So how do people hide in plain sight? How do they hide in the noise? I was really interested in in hearing the doctoral award of somebody who's interested in the maths of search. Starts to become very relevant in these sort of contexts, and really understanding the question about adversarial attack on data science capabilities, on artificial intelligence, and understanding the scientific base of adversaries. So that's the disruption, and now to the opportunities. I mean, the first is to say that operations research and systems modeling have a vast potential impact for national security. So things that immediately come to mind is efficiency. I mean, classically, the defense community have had a substantial operations research capability, which they've somewhat shared with, but on the whole has been independent of national security. So there's a big efficiency agenda which can probably be served. Business process optimization agenda. There's a vast number of resource allocation problems. Think of counterterrorism, which is a very challenging resource allocation problem. You know, how do you allocate your surveillance? You know, how do you allocate your surveillance resources in order to do that without efficiently, without intrusion, excessive intrusion? How do you undertake games on networks, being the general thing of the generalization of a contested situation, particularly when you think about cyber assets and vulnerabilities? How do you place resources? Again, think about surveillance. How do you place intelligence collection assets, actually very similar to the class of problems that Blackett concerned himself with in submarine warfare. And of course, then the issue and the use of what's now becoming very fashionable, which is digital twins. A few other, and conscious a bit of time, a few other topics that I think are of real importance. It's clear that behavioral science has a massive role to play, and behavioral science integrated with data science through behavioral analytics. It's clear that privacy enhancing technologies, so how can you compute while staying secret, while keeping data private, is really important, both to limit intrusion and to limit risk. The democratization of space, you know, a couple of 100,000 to buy yourself a little bit of satellite isn't suddenly looks quite different from the billions spent on such assets. What is the future of cybersecurity, and how does that look like? What does secrecy look like in smart environments and cities, and how can we leverage smart environments and cities for security? The last is what benefits might be yielded by the use of the whole family of technologies around distributed ledgers and smart technologies, particularly in the regulatory space. A few other things just to signal, which I think are really interesting. Novel materials, novel smart materials, vastly interesting, particularly bioengineering, micro-robotics, novel sensors, and I think an underplayed neuroscience. All of those, I think, sit on a longer term agenda, and each of them themselves entail a series of very interesting, present a whole series of very interesting optimization and computation challenges for which OR methods are extremely well suited. Well, conscious a little bit of time, what I'll do is stop at this point, and I understand that the questions have been accumulating, and I will attempt to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. That was a fascinating lecture, really fascinating. We're very, very grateful. Now I'm going to hand to Gavin, who will oversee the questions and answers. So Gavin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Edmund. Okay, first up, Anthony, does picking areas of science and technology to concentrate on mean picking winners? How would you go about doing that? And do you think we could choose well enough?
Well, the first one is, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, yes, it does. Yes, it does. We are we are, despite our strong scientific performance, as a nation, we have a limited economic and industrial capacity that's not universal, and we are going to need to have to make some strategic choices. Some of those things are about picking winners. Some of those things are about picking areas in which we may not win on. The framework that's being widely used in government is own, collaborate, access. So what we're going to have to do is sort of make choice about where we think we can own an area, where we think we can play a major role by through collaboration and partnering, and where we think basically what we need to do is secure access to the technology or scientific area, but essentially don't expect to be making major contributions. We've just set up some new apparatus to support that. So now there is going to be a Prime Ministerial Council on Science and Technology, first time ever. So the Prime Minister chaired, a committee, and they sat around the table and discussed quantum technologies. It's the first time that's happened at that level. And we have a new Office for Science and Technology Strategy, ultimately working to Patrick Balance. So we've got some new apparatus. Whether we have the analytic acuity, I don't know. And clearly, we're going to have to take a portfolio approach to cover off some of the risk, because you rightly say there's a risk.
Okay, thank you. Next one. Given the changing nature of both the actors involved in national security over the years, Cold War, IRA, radical fanaticism, and the shift from physical actions to virtual / information / cyber terrorism, how do we balance our investments versus the threats, and where can OR?
So that's a superb question. It's a superb question, and actually, the truth is that much of that decision making has been, and resource allocation decision making has been qualitative, is the polite description. Is the polite description, and I think that resource allocation decisions in national security are precisely the domain of where national security, where operations research can do most. So I think it's maybe more difficult to say, how do you balance up against between, say, terrorism and and nuclear proliferation. But for example, if the question is, you've got a long tail of potential people, subjects of interest a terrorism standpoint, how do you devote your resources across there, and how much to the tail and how much to the head? That is the sort of question which operations research can provide real insight into. So I think, honestly, national security has been very late to the table for really modeling informed decision making. So there's a massive opportunity.
Thank you. Next one. How do you think that the rate of digital innovation and disruption will impact national security? Do you think the risk assessment frameworks currently employed are fit for purpose to assess these rapid innovations?
I mean, the digital disruption of, I mean, look, in every, national security is not immune to the digital disruption seen in every organization and an enterprise. Whereas I would say that, and much of the has been relatively slow in responding to that digital disruption, and I would and so and there's a real, I mean, this is open knowledge because the it was in the spending review before last, is that there is now a major program of work to address a new digital infrastructure for the UK's national security.
Thank you. A couple more. Often soft skills such as empathy and understanding are undervalued in the face of adversity. How could these be leveraged to internally support the UK and improve national public morale in the face of persistent uncertainty and adversity?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, one thing to say is that there is a massive role for behavioral science in national security. Massive role for behavioral sciences in firstly, in communicating about risks. A massive role for behavioral science in understanding threat and threat actors. A massive role in understanding how to communicate with adversaries and to get people on side, and to impact their security behaviors and so on. So many of those inverted commas soft skills are amenable to scientific study and understanding. So I mean, an example I can talk about is most people have, well, a couple of things I can talk about. One is see it, say it, sorted, which actually, I mean, people got tired of see it, say it, sorted as a phrase, but that was a fantastic piece of behavioral sciences research that designed that public communication program, had a significant effect on people, and there's a whole load of other science that underpins it. People might also be familiar with Project Servitor, which is and people might have gone to various places where you've seen things like, this is Fluffy the drugs dog, Fluffy, the drugs dog, will be on duty today, or to be, or and that's an example also of a behavioral sciences informed intervention, highly effective. And there's a whole range of such things, all of them informed by, which are behavioral but informed by good science.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll finish with something a little more light-hearted. If you were Q in the next James Bond movie, which single OR technique would you equip 007 with on his/her next mission, and why?
Okay. Gosh, there's an awful lot of things. And sort of magic. I mean, I know that I'm fairly sure that what a lot of such people might want, what 007 might want, would be a Babel fish. So to be able to pass and to be able to talk to everybody within a cultural reference frame that they understand, and that would save an awful lot of the unfilmed 2 years that James Bond will otherwise spend learning whatever language it was necessary to learn. Maybe more seriously, one thing I worked on a bit in government was the problem of surveillance and counter-surveillance. So people spend an awful lot of time trying to follow bad guys. This is true in policing as well, and it's very, very difficult and very, very resource consumptive. And being able to know exactly where you need to be as people are moving through a complex environment, that would be pretty good. The other thing I think that 007 might want is the ability to pay people without detection. I'm not going to say too much about that. But let's say you had somebody who was inside a Russian ransomware gang. You might want to, or a child exploitation. So you might well want to pay them, but you don't want large lumps of cash turning up. Not so straightforward.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Well, with time in mind, we'll call a close to the question and answer session. Thanks to everybody for submitting those. Sorry if we didn't quite get round to yours. I'm now going to hand back to Edmund for some closing comments.
Thank you, Gavin, and thanks once again, Anthony, for such a fascinating and outstanding lecture. I really, really enjoyed it, and it's a great addition to our series of Blackett lectures. I know that the audience are grateful and appreciative. Thank you. I'd like to, before we close this evening, I'd like to thank once again the winners of our awards for their brilliant contributions to our discipline. And I'd like to thank all of you, the attendees, for making this virtual Blackett lecture the success that it's been. Thank you very much indeed. But there's a final thank you I would like to give, and that's to all the OR staff who have worked so hard to organise this. Organising a virtual event like this is probably harder than organising a real event. It's run so smoothly, it's gone so well. Thank you all very much. In particular, thanks to Karen, Carol, Gavin, and the marketing team. Before we close, I want to remind you about the separate networking session. And I want to say that hopefully this time next year, we'll all be together in London at the real event with some virtual input, but we'll be able to meet and chat at the next Blackett lecture. Thank you all very much. Good evening and goodbye.